Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are just past the trading deadline in the 2030 season. The Wings are having a okay season. We are 58 and 51, third place in the National League East, 7 games behind the Mets. Positively, we are in the second wild card spot right now, 2.5 games up on the fourth and final wild card spot. So the team should be in a decent position to make the playoffs for a third consecutive year. But clearly, we're hoping to have more than a .532 winning percentage with this win now team. One positive thing that I can say about our Buffalo Wings is that the team is getting better each month. We had a losing record in April, got above 500 in May, a little better in June, and the recently completed month of July was our best month of the season thus far. And we also did make 2 additions at or close to the trade deadline that hopefully will help us. Made a big trade for John Featherston to become our starting center fielder, and that has definitely improved our defense in center field and left field. Featherston hitting .280 for us so far, slightly above average in terms of his OPS plus. Defensively in center field for us, though, has delivered above average zone rating, defensive efficiency, and arm. And in addition to strengthening our center field position, being able to move Vance Honeycutt to left field has been positive as well, because he has been well above average in zone rating and defensive efficiency, and even surprisingly somewhat slightly above average with his arm defensively in left field. So that's been a move that hopefully has improved 2 positions for us defensively, while hopefully not giving up too much in terms of our offense. And the other move that we recently made was bringing on Cade Smith, who's headed to arbitration next year. Had a rough year with Cleveland, and they decided to move on from him. He's pitched 4 games for us, won 1, saved 3, struck out 8 in 4 innings. Obviously a very small sample size, but his fit minus and his Sierra are absolutely off the charts thus far with us. So hopefully both of those players can help us continue to play even better each month. Would love to have a better record in August than we did in July, and a better record in September than we did in August, and go into the playoffs on a real high note with this team as we try to hopefully get these Wings to a World Series in their 5th year in Major League Baseball. And I'm probably jinxing myself by saying this now that we are past the trade deadline, but we have nobody on the injured list at the major league level right now, and actually not even a crazy number of people on the injured list across our minor league system. So the team has been relatively healthy this year. Obviously, the hope is for that to continue over the next couple of months and into the off season. And although the focus for this episode is going to be doing exactly that and hopefully guiding this team to a good finish and into the postseason, I am going to think about the offseason a little bit, because I'd like to get some thoughts from the wisdom of the viewers as to how we should proceed. I think our budget is kind of tapped out in Buffalo. We won 71 games in our first year and got a nice bump from 180 million to 220 million. We won 72 games that second year and got bumped for 2028 to 228 million. That year we won 101 games and the National League East, and we made it to the NLCS and had our budget cut to 222 million. Last season, we won 90 games, earned a wild card, won a wild card series, and made it to the NLDS. And we actually were profitable for the year and came back with the exact same budget for this season that we are now operating under. So it seems like somewhere in that $220 to $230 million range is probably going to be about the top of the budget that we're going to have in Buffalo, which puts us in the lower half of the league potentially in terms of our potential budget and potential player payroll. So when I think about next year, right now this season we've got 164 million on the books, and you can see that with the moves that we've recently made, that number is expected to go up by about 30 million next season. So clearly not something that we're going to be able to afford unless we totally strip our scouting and player development down to total bare bones, and that is not something that I'm willing to do. So barring a remarkable increase in our budget for this upcoming 2031 season, we're going to have to probably clear 20, 25, 30 million off the payroll next year just to get us back to a level that is sustainable for this Buffalo franchise. So to do that, I see four options, and would love your thoughts in the comments in the coming days on these four options. Obviously, it's going to be a little while and a few days till we get to the postseason, and I need to seriously think about these things. But if you have thoughts on what we should do, would love to hear them, because although I'm not planning on going into a total rebuild. And obviously, if we somehow win it all this year and make a ton of money and get a huge bump to our budget, we may not need to adjust. But I think in most likely scenarios, we're going to need to cut a bunch of salary next season. And I see four ways that I think we could do that. If there's another path, in a fifth way, would love your thoughts on that also. First is to get rid of Adley Rutschman, one of the top catchers in baseball, but his salary is going to be inching up over the next several seasons. At $36 million next year, it will be the highest on the team. He is still a premier defensive and an excellent offensive catcher. He has been an all-star each of his 2 seasons with us. You can see he's won a lot of hardware over the years. Taking a look at his batting stats, had a bit of a down year in his first year for us last year, but has bounced back this year, hitting .265, 23 homers, 15 ribbies, 865 OPS. His OPS plus and his WRC plus are both over 130, and he looks like he's on his way to having about a 5 WAR season. So still an extremely valuable player, both offensively and defensively as a catcher. But he's obviously the most expensive player on our team. Would leave a huge hole offensively and defensively if we were to move on from him at catcher. But that would be one way to clear up some money. Second would be to move on from our ace, Shohei Ohtani. We did structure his contract, so the amounts are coming down pretty significantly these next couple years. He's going to be at $25 million next year, and as it has a $20 million vesting option if he pitches 162 innings. So not as much bang for the buck moving on from him, but he's also an older player. Movement on his pitches becoming a bit of a concern. That said, though, he is clearly our ace. Had a 4.04 ERA his first season in the National League, but since then, 15-9, 3.11 ERA, 12-11, 3.33 ERA, and he's 7-5 this year with a 3.33 ERA again. His Sierras were under 3 each of his first 3 years with us, a little higher at 3.30 this year, but still on pace to be well over a 4 WAR player for us this season. So he is perhaps not an ace, but a very solid major league starter, and would leave a hole in our pitching staff if we moved on from him. But that would allow us to potentially clear about $25 million, or exactly $25 million next year. But then that also takes out the optionality of us potentially having him at a, I don't want to say a bargain basement price, but a potentially good deal at $20 million for the 2032 season if he's still pitching well. Third option would be to move on from our shortstop, Marcelo Meyer. He is the youngest of these three players by a significant amount. He's also on a contract that, unlike Rutschman, is going to be paying him less in the subsequent season until he gets to that team option. Interesting that it's the 2035 season, despite the fact that we brought these three guys on in different years. Rutschman, Meyer, and Painter all have team options in the 2035 season. But back to Marcelo Meyer. He's fragile, and he did miss some time his first season with us. But he's been pretty productive this year, hitting 267, 24 doubles, 10 homers, above average in terms of his offensive metrics, 3 WAR on the season, so he's on his way to about a 4.5 WAR potentially. A good, solid defensive shortstop who still has an above average bat. Making a lot of money, but similar to Rutschman, he is a good defense with good offense at a premium defensive position. But we could clear $27 million next year by moving on from him. And then the fourth option that I can think of to again clear probably at least $25 million from the books would be to move on from several less highly paid players. One obvious lever to get there is going to be our former closer Andres Munoz, who's due to make $10 million next year, and our current closer that we just picked up in trade, Cade Smith, who's going to be making about $7.5 million next year through arbitration. Probably can't afford to have both of them back, so we could save between $7 to $10 million by moving on from one of them. Another option to move on from would be Andrew Painter. Similar to Meyer, he's one of the younger guys on our team who's highly paid, and he also has a contract that's going to be paying him less each season. But Painter, at this point in his career at 27 years old, definitely is a player whose performance on the field does not live up to his ratings. You can see he's got an excellent changeup, a very good fastball, and a solid major league slider and curve. He's got extreme ground ball tendencies, throws in the mid to high 90s with plus control, plus movement, and even his stuff a little bit above average. On paper or on the computer screen, he looks like a pretty good 2 or 3 starter. Not an ace, but a very valuable pitcher. But quite honestly, when we look at what he's done over 8 years in the majors, split now evenly between Philadelphia and Buffalo, and he started one game now more in Buffalo than he has in Philadelphia. He's had good defenses behind him at times in Buffalo. He's had poor defenses behind himself at times in Buffalo. And he's put up a 4.73 ERA in Buffalo, a 4.86 ERA in Philadelphia. His Sierras are about a run better, and he's definitely a well above replacement level person, but he seems to be settling in more as a somewhat of an innings eater, I guess, in today's day and age. If you go 180, 190 innings in a season, that makes you a little bit of an innings eater. But he's definitely not a frontline starter in terms of his performance on the field, even though it looks like he could be a borderline frontline starter when I look at his ratings. So you could pair a Painter up with a Munoz or a Cade Smith and kind of get to the money that we need to get off. Or you could get rid of one of those 3 pitchers and then layer in some of these other guys. Nick York is going to be about $4 million in arbitration next year, with him having a down year and not being good defensively. He's an option to move on from. Could move on from a Sean Sullivan or an Emerson Talavera, even potentially a Takao Ota. Those guys are going to be making $3.5 to $4.5 million a year. Samuel Basallo is a one-dimensional slugger. He's going to finally hit arbitration and be making $7 million next year. This is a guy who has been a all-star twice. He's won a Silver Slugger in each of his 2 seasons and was Rookie of the Year. and he seems like he's well on his way to another Silver Slugger this year, but he brings nothing to the table defensively, or very little to the table defensively, and is going to start getting a little more expensive. I don't think I would move on from Vance Honeycutt around $5 million. I don't think I would move on from Harleen Susanna around $4 million. But some combination of the likes of Painter, Munoz, maybe Jace Young, Nick York, possibly a Sean Sullivan, possibly a Samuel Basallo, could do some combination of those guys to take 20, 25, 30 million books off the books as well. So those are kind of the four ways I see us right-sizing our budget this coming off season. Move on from Rutschman, move on from Ohtani, move on from Meyer, or move on from one of the closers and some combination of some other players. And would love to hear thoughts from frequent viewers and new viewers, frequent commenters and new commenters, as to which one of those potential paths in the off season makes the most sense to you and why. I think I'm going to have to do something, because unless we get a big bump, a $30 million increase in our payroll is just not practical. So I'm going to have to do something, and those to me seem like the three paths that are possible. So if you've got thoughts on what we should do, please share them with me over the next couple of days before we get to the postseason and the off season. And it would be nice to be doing this and making these decisions from a position of strength after potentially winning the World Series. But we've got some work to do over the next 2 months just to make sure that we are even in the playoffs. And that's what we are going to focus on now. In taking a look at our schedule for August, we do have a lot of divisional games. Start off at Montreal and Philadelphia, home with a 4-game series against the first place Mets. Then we do go on a road trip to Texas and host Nashville against some American League teams. But then we finish the month at Washington, home against the Phillies, home against Atlanta, and then at the Twins. So the predominance of our games over this month of August are going to be against the teams we're competing with in the NL East, and certainly that 4-game homestand against the Mets if we are to make up that 7-game gap on them in the standings. Probably need to go at least 3-1 in that 4-game series to have any chance of coming back in the division, even though it is only going to be early August when it's taking place. And you knew that this was coming when I was talking about injuries, but Nick York, who, as I mentioned, is having a down year after being a pretty consistent hitter for us over the first 4 years in Buffalo, batting just .240 this year, day-to-day with back spasms. Since he hasn't been playing real well, we're actually going to just put him on the IL, make sure that the injury doesn't linger, and that'll give us an opportunity to bring up somebody from AAA who's potentially a better fielder, and also potentially give the Rule 5 prospect Rafael Radillo a little more playing time over the next couple of weeks. And with York on the IL, we're going to bring Lang Choi back up from AAA. He did not hit much in Buffalo this year, but he's hit at .344 in AAA with 16 doubles and 9 homers and 218 at-bats. Not a lot for him to prove down there. Give him an opportunity to get some regular at-bats, at least against left-handed pitching, for the next couple of weeks. And not a great start to the month for the Wings. We won the first game against Montreal, but then lost 3 in a row on the road. So a 1-3 road trip to Canada. We've got those 3 games against the Phillies before the 4-game series against the Mets this week. We are now 9 games behind the Mets, and we're 2.5 up on the final wild card spot at this point. So clearly going to need a good performance against the Phillies, And then, as I said, probably need to win at least 3 out of 4 against the Mets to keep ourselves on the margins of being in contention for the division. And unfortunately, it was not a very successful week. We did take 2 out of 3 on the road in Philadelphia against the 7th place Phillies, but then unfortunately, we lost 3 out of 4 at home against the Mets. So the division was a long shot, anyways, but now we are 10 games out in the division. Pretty hard to see a scenario where we're going to get past the Mets. Quite honestly, we're only 1 game up on the last wild card at this point. So hopefully finishing the second half of the month of August stronger than our first 12 days of the month will put us in a good position to ensure that we're going to at least earn a wild card. But hard to envision a scenario where we're going to be able to make up a 10-game gap on the Mets with just 42 games left to play on our end with the way we've been playing this season. Looking at the stats, Basallo, who we talked about earlier, still second in the National League in homers. Deshaun Seifu up to 60 stolen bases, leading the league for a potentially third consecutive year there. And still don't really have anyone on the leaderboard as far as our pitchers. And another minor injury situation, but the timing was okay. Right when Nick York was ready to come off of the IL, Jace Barofin, sore elbow, going to impact him for a week. So we're going to put him on for 10 days. Obviously, if you saw the stars of those guys, you know that I am looking relative to a lower league than Major League Baseball with some moves that we've been making in our minor league system. But got York back. Barofin going on the IL, and we'll see what the injury situation looks like in 10 days when he is ready to hopefully rejoin the lineup. Might be time to send somebody down just for a little over a week. Would think that certainly Lang Choi, maybe we'll end up needing to send him back down to Albany for a week before bringing him up at September call-offs if there are no more injuries by the time Barofin is healthy. But we'll cross that bridge in about a week and a half. And it ended up being a decent week for us, although we did lose 2 out of 3 in Texas. We swept the Nashville Stars at home. Good pitching performances, winning 2-1, 3-2, and 3-0. So now we are back in a run against NL East teams with Washington, Philadelphia, and Atlanta over the next week and a half or so. Taking a look at the standings, we are 9 out. We are up 2 on the wild card in the second wild card position right now. So we would have a home series against the Giants if the season were to end today. Certainly opportunity to make up some ground in the wild card on the Nationals and potentially put ourselves into the first wild card position, which in theory is potentially beneficial because it would mean that in the second round you would get the 67-win Reds rather than the 74-win Mets. But as those of you who have been following closely know, the Reds took us out in the NLCS 2 years ago, and they took us out in the NLDS last season, and they are 2-time defending World Series champions, so that is certainly not an easy matchup either, even though on paper you probably would prefer to be facing the Reds rather than the Mets, given that the Mets have the second best record in baseball at this point. So wild card positioning still up for grabs, and certainly this upcoming series against Washington is going to go a long way towards determining whether we can potentially get the first wild card, or at the very least put ourselves in a position so that we'll be hosting a wild card series rather than on the road for those 3 games. And Jace Barofin ready to come off of the IL. He's hitting only .237 this year, and honestly, Lang Choi has been hitting okay since he came up. He's got his batting average at the major league level up to 283. So I think we're actually going to put Barofin in AAA on a rehab assignment for the next 8 or 9 days until September call-ups, and then we will bring him up, and it's conceivable that we'll give him some pretty regular playing time once he's back. But right now it seems like we've got a bit of a hot hand with the right-handed hitting Lang Choi, and we're going to ride with him for another week or so rather than send him down to the minors, since he's been hitting well for us. Unfortunately, we have lost 2 in a row to Washington after winning the first game of that series. Hopefully we can get the series split today and then take at least 2 out of 3 against the Phillies before the last week in August begins. And we actually have a real injury to deal with right now. Rafael Redillo, the Rule 5 acquisition, who's hit 244 and 156 at-bats for us, out with an oblique strain for 6 to 7 weeks. So that makes our decision-making a little bit easier. We will put him on the IL. Barofin will come back up. He was 1 for 7 in 2 games in AAA for us. But he'll come back up to the major league lineup now, and then we'll get to bring up probably some help for the infield also with the September roster expansion in about a week, now that Redillo's probably lost for the rest of the regular season. Not going well. We lost the last game against Washington. We've split the first 2 at home against Philadelphia. Hopefully we can at least win the series tomorrow. But the standing situation is getting dicey. We're still in third, 12 games back. We're still in the second wild card spot, 2 games up on being out of the playoffs, potentially. But or actually 2 games up on being tied for the last wild card spot, more accurately. But it's 68 and 64. The season is definitely not as successful as we had hoped. And we did at least win the final game of the series against the Phillies. So now we got 2 against Atlanta and then 2 on the road against the Twins before the month of August is somewhat mercifully going to be over. And fortunately, we're finishing up the month of August strong. Ended up winning our final 5 games, sweeping the 2-game series at Atlanta, and taking 2 out of the first 3 against the Twins in Minnesota. Taking a look at our schedule for the month of September. Got a lot of games out of division. 3 against Seattle at home, 3 against Colorado at home. Then we go on the road against the Giants and the Cubs. Finish up the road trip at the Mets. Those games probably aren't going to be incredibly important, with us being 11.5 back at this point. Home against Montreal and Miami, and then 3 at Pittsburgh to finish off the month of September, and that is the end of the regular season as well. So I'm going to figure out who we're going to bring up with September roster expansion now. Still in third place, 11.5 behind in the East, but with those 5 straight wins, we are now up 4 games on the 3rd and 4th wild card spots in the National League. So at the very least, hopefully we will have ourselves positioned to have a home wild card series. Taking a look at the team statistics here, we didn't end up salvaging a winning record again in August. We were 10 and 13 before winning those last 5 games, but turned the month around a bit over that last week. Hopefully we can have a 600 winning percentage in September. 576 is the highest winning percentage we've had in a month this year in July. Would be great to be heading into the playoffs. Feeling good about our team, and a strong September would help us move in that direction. As September begins, we are 6th in the National League in runs scored, so we've slipped 1 back over the past month. But we're now up to 6th in runs allowed. The starters' ERA is still very strong. The bullpen ERA is ranking 11th, is a little better than it has been. And we actually have made a little bit of progress in defensive efficiency and zone rating since we made the acquisition to bring over Mr. Featherston to hopefully stabilize our center field defense. And he's also been pretty successful offensively, hitting .324 for us, 14 doubles, 3 triples, and 7 home runs in 170 at-bats, .951 OPS. His OPS plus and his WRC plus both over 150, and has a WAR of almost 3 in the 50 games he's played for us. So certainly has been much better than we could have expected with the bat. Would love to have him continue performing that way. And taking a look at our new addition on the pitching staff, Cade Smith, 2-2 record with 11 saves in 15 games. So he's been involved in a decision one way or another every time he's been on the mound. Still has 20 strikeouts in 14 and a third innings. 290 BABIP against him, a 233 ERA. Hasn't been perfect, but has certainly been solid, and hopefully help stabilize things in our pen. It looks like Andres Munoz has been pitching a little better since we moved him into more of a setup role. He's gotten his ERA down since he lost the closer position to Cade Smith. We did actually have a pretty valuable player just come to us and ask about extending his contract. Adrian Morejon has been a really good pitcher for us the last 3 years since we picked him up. 117 innings pitched out of the bullpen this year right now in 79 games, and it's only September 1st. So carrying a 1970s Mike Marshall type reliever workload at this point. He is fragile, and he's been on a really attractive contract for us the last few years. $1.6 million this year. It was a 3-year deal at an average of $1.5 million a year. The issue is that looking for an extension, he's looking for about $12 million a year. So clearly, with the salary situation that we are dealing with, Mr. Morejon's tenure with the Wings is likely coming to an end after the playoffs this season, but he's done a really good job for us, and will definitely leave a hole in our bullpen with the hard-throwing left-hander moving on somewhere else after this season. But I don't foresee a scenario where we will likely be able to keep him. And the 2 September call-up decisions are going to be pretty easy for us. Toshimitsu Kato, who we sent down a couple of months ago, hitting .281 in Albany since he's gone down. Think that glove is a potential defensive substitute for us at the major league level. Still has some value. Don't know how much the guy's ever going to hit at the major league level, but we will bring Mr. Kato back up to the majors to give us a little more versatility in terms of some late inning defense, hopefully. And then the other promotion is going to be the young pitcher Jorge Carrillo, particularly if we do end up moving on from a Ohtani or a Painter or some of the top closers in this offseason, as well as we talked about, potentially almost certainly moving on from Morejon. Carrillo likely is going to play an important role for us next year as either a 4th or 5th starter or an arm out of the bullpen. He was up with us a little bit this year, was not great. 9-7 in AAA with a 4.72 ERA for us this year. So certainly not great down there either. But his Sierra was 3.39. He was 2.7 wins above replacement. He's 24 years old now. We think other than perhaps improving his fastball, sinker, and splitter a little bit, he's pretty much fully developed at this point. So be interested in seeing how he can contribute in the bullpen over the last month of the season, and hopefully set himself up for some success as a full-time member of our pitching staff next year, when we're going to be needing some players making the major league minimum like him to make our budget work. And although we won our first game of the month against Minnesota, we lost 2 out of 3 in Seattle. And unfortunately, injury situation has popped up. Adrian Morejon, the excellent left-handed reliever that we talked about, out with a sprained ankle for 5 to 6 weeks. His fragile injury proneness perhaps catching up with him. He's going to finish with an excellent season, 135 strikeouts in 119 and third innings. 4 wins, 5 saves, 26 holds. And unless we make a long playoff run, unfortunately, Morejon's career with the Buffalo Wings is likely over. And with the injury to Morejon, Fernando Guanare, a player that we picked in the expansion draft several years ago, has steadily moved up through our system. A 27-year-old who's never pitched in the majors, been our closer across Utica and Albany in AA and AAA over the last couple of seasons. 39 saves with more than a strikeout per inning in Albany this year. And I don't know if Guanare is a big part of our long-term plans, but we're going to at least get a look at him at the major league level over these last few weeks of the season. And I don't want to say I jinxed us when talking about how we had no injuries at the start of this episode, but we just suffered a major one. Marcelo Meyer, shortstop, fractured elbow, out for 7 months. So his season is over, and he's likely to miss a good chunk of spring training next year. So that's going to leave a big hole in our lineup. We do now have Kato up, who can give us quality defense at shortstop, but his bat is going to be nowhere near the production that we got out of Meyer. Hit 260 this year with 33 doubles, 12 home runs. Above average in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus. His WAR for the year is going to end up being 3.8. But clearly the loss of Meyer is going to be a significant issue for us as we try to ensure that we at least hold on to a playoff spot with this team. We split the first 2 games in Colorado at this point. Won 7-0 yesterday, but lost 10-5. Actually, won 7-0 2 days ago. Lost 10-5 yesterday. Taking a look at the standings here, and we are still in third, 12.5 back. The Braves really sinking. The Expos are actually in 4th place now, but only 3 teams in the NL East with winning records. We're up 5.5 for a wild card, and right now the losing record Expos and Rockies are tied for that final wild card spot. So a pretty mediocre National League this year. A lot of better teams in the American League. 535 winning percentage gets you the last wild card in the American League. You'd be the second wild card in the National League with that winning percentage. So clearly a big loss for us to have Marcelo Meyer gone for the year. Hopefully we can at least hold on to a home wild card series, and then we'll take our chances in the playoffs, but certainly feel less optimistic about this win now team being able to put a real big postseason together with the loss of our starting shortstop. And as I prepared to put Meyer on the IL, I see that Vance Honeycutt is also injured with a diagnosis pending. So the news could go from horrible to just completely catastrophic if it ends up that Honeycutt also has a significant injury. Unfortunately, we do have a competent defensive shortstop in AAA with Nico Horner, who we signed as a minor league free agent this past year. He's angry that he's not in the majors, but was our starting shortstop in AAA this year, where he was reasonably productive. We'll bring him up, and we'll kind of decide on who is going to get the playing time at short between him and Kato. Although Cato's better defensively, I tend to think even at this point Horner may be a little bit better bat, so it may make sense to let Nico get the majority of playing time for us. And unfortunately, with Morejon out for the rest of the year, Marcelo Meyer out till well into spring training next year, Radillo out for the year. The news has gotten even worse. Vance Honeycutt, a torn UCL, out for 8 months, so his season is over. Batting average dipped to 266, but still had 24 homers, 74 ribbies, 39 steals. Third consecutive 20-30 year for Vance Honeycutt in terms of homers and stolen bases. Kind of the worst year he's had for us in a while. And it's over early at this point. That is going to be a huge loss. We've lost basically our number 2 hitter in Marcelo Meyer, and then one of the guys who's right in the middle of our lineup with the injury to Vance Honeycutt over the last couple of days. So I think hopefully we'll still make the playoffs, but the chances of this win now team going on a long run, missing our starting shortstop, our starting left fielder, and one of the best relievers out of our bullpen is definitely a lower probability event than we certainly would have hoped. And with the injury to Honeycutt, we'll get to see another player who could be part of our future. Vaughn Necker, guy who was our second round draft pick back in 2025. Hit 281 with 27 doubles, 38 homers, and 110 ribbies this year in AAA Albany as an everyday player. He's kind of a corner infielder. We've been training him to be a corner outfielder in left field recently. Doesn't have a lot left to prove in AAA. The batting profile doesn't suggest he's going to be a monster at the major league level, but particularly if we end up moving on corner infield, corner outfield types like Nick York this coming offseason, there is certainly potential that Necker could be in the running to make our 26-man roster next year. So we'll at least get a little preview of what the 23-year-old can do at the major league level over these last few weeks of the season. And we ended up losing the series in San Francisco, but we did take the series in Chicago. We've got 3 against the Mets on the road, and then 3 at home against Montreal this week before finishing off the season against Miami and Pittsburgh. Record stands at 79 and 71, still in third place in the NL East. And we're still holding on to that second wild card spot. We're up 2 on the Giants to be hosting the potential series with them. And we are up 3.5 on the Rockies to maintain at least a playoff appearance. So we're not in a horrible situation with 12 games to go, but certainly in a more tenuous position than we would like to be. And the injuries just continue. Nico Horner, who we had put into that shortstop role, actually was hitting pretty well in his first week with us, 7 for 17 with a double and a triple. He is now out for 2 weeks with back tightness, so we will be finishing up Mr. Horner's season on the IL as well. Probably means that Kato ultimately will be our everyday shortstop now, and we're going to be going down to that increasingly depleted Albany roster for some help. Obviously, not obviously, but their season is, I believe, over at this point. But actually, I should just make sure about that. I'm pretty sure their season is done, but let's check and make sure. Yeah, they just finished up a couple of days ago. So Albany's season is over. So the fact that we've been steadily pulling players off of their team to help with all the injuries, not a big issue at this point. Obviously been a rough season, particularly recently. but did feel like we had some success in the minors this year. Every team was 500 or better. So a little bit of success on the field to hopefully help with the player development across our system. Obviously, we'll be digging in on the performances and the prospects of a lot of our big-time minor league players in an upcoming episode when we recap the season. But right now, the goal is to have a strong final 2 weeks of the season, ensure that we get into a wild card spot, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to host a 3-game wild card series when all is said and done. And we only took 1 out of 3 against the Mets in Citi Field, so still in third place, 13 and a half back with 9 games to go. Magic number for the playoffs is 6, but we are now behind the Giants by half a game in our quest to at least be hosting a wild card series. The Giants, you can see, have won 8 in a row, 9-1 in their last 10. So got a lot of pressure on us. We're up 2.5 to at least maintain a wild card position. Big series against Montreal right now, one of the teams that is still chasing for a wild card spot. If we can at least take 2 out of 3 against the Expos at home, hopefully that'll be a big step in the direction of getting close to clinching a playoff spot. And unfortunately, but perhaps not surprisingly, given the way this season is going, we're going to make it hard on ourselves. We ended up losing 2 out of 3 at home against Montreal. So 6 games left in the season now. Final 3 home games of the regular season against the Marlins, and then on the road against the Pirates to finish things off. The Marlins and Pirates are 2 of the worst teams in our division, so that's positive. But at this point, although we are up 3 on the wild card, the last wild card spot, and our magic number is down to 4, we're a game and a half behind the Giants. So we were at a point not too long ago when we felt pretty good that we'd be hosting a wild card series. And now we're probably going to need to go at least 4-2, more likely probably need to go 5-1 or 6-0 to ensure that we can get past the Giants in the standings and be able to be hosting that wild card series. And we won the first game of the series against Miami, lost the second. So taking a look at the standings, we're up 3.5 for the final wild card spot, and our magic number is down to 2. But we're a game and a half behind the Giants. As you can tell from my voice, or as you can probably tell from my voice, something bad has happened. And it's been pretty bad in terms of the injuries, as we've talked about, with Morejon, Radillo, Honeycutt, Meyer, and now Horner on the IL. But Shohei Ohtani was just suspended for 11 games. So his season is over, and he will not be available for certainly a wild card round of the playoffs. If we're fortunate enough to get through the wild card round, mathematically, we could have him for maybe one start towards the end of a National League Division series, but everything seems to be unraveling very quickly for these Buffalo Wings here in the final days of the season. Ohtani's going to finish with an 11-9 record, 3.19 ERA, 4.3 WAR on the season. So a very respectable season, but not a great season. But he gets suspended for his role in a brawl, and the timing, to say the least, is not perfect with just 4 games left in the regular season. And we did thankfully get a 9-8 win, so we did take the series at home against Miami, 2 out of 3. They were all one-run games. Take a look at the standings here as we head into the final series with Pittsburgh, and our magic number is 1, but we are still half a game behind the Giants. Obviously, our hope is that they'll lose today on our off day, and will at least be in a flat-footed tie with the Giants as we begin the final 3 games of this regular season. And unfortunately for us, the Giants did win, so they are a full game ahead of us with 3 games to go. Take a look at the team versus team standings, and we are 1-2 against the Giants this year, so we're also a game behind them. So realistically, probably going to need to go 3-0 to have any chance of getting past them. And if we go 3-0, we're going to need them to go 1-2 to get past them in the standings and have the opportunity to at least host that wild card series that we will be in. Because even though we didn't play yesterday, it looks like either St. Louis or Colorado lost. Probably more Colorado lost because we could still end up tied with St. Louis. And Colorado says L1, so that would be a pretty good indication that they lost their last game. So we are going to be back in the playoffs, but an 83-86 win season that will end up with a lot of key players on the IL or suspended in late September is not the way we drew this up. And we just lost the first game of the series at Pittsburgh 5-0. San Francisco also lost. So we are still mathematically battling for the opportunity to host that wild card series against them. But unfortunately, we're going to have to go 2-0, and they're going to have to go 0-2 for it to happen. So we can't just start trying to set up our pitching staff for the playoffs quite yet, because clearly the preference will be to have the best situation possible with our starters, given that our number 1 starter is not going to be available. But Harleen Susanna on the mound today, and we don't really have the opportunity to try to save him for the playoffs yet, because still the preference would be to ensure that we get home field advantage, and it's still in play, at least today. And another loss for us against Pittsburgh. So now the question is, do we have a chance of falling to the 4th wild card spot? And we do not. We are locked in to the 3rd wild card spot. We are going to be on the road for a 3-game series at San Francisco. So at the very least, that will give us the opportunity to pitch whoever we want. Hayden Yinger scheduled to go today. Quite honestly, we're going to hold him back so he can go in game 1 or maybe game 2 of the playoff series, although Painter pitched 2 games ago, and then Susanna just pitched yesterday. So yeah, we're definitely going to want to let Yinger rest today. So we're going to figure out if there's someone in our bullpen who hasn't pitched in a few days and put them into the spot for Yinger. If we have to call somebody up, we will. Do have some decent injury news here ahead of game 162. Both Nico Horner and Rafael Radillo are eligible to come back onto the roster. Horner will likely take over as shortstop for us. I don't think, based on when we had the injuries, that he's going to be eligible for the playoffs. So that is not really good. Yeah, I guess we can add him to the playoff roster, so potentially he'll take over as our shortstop. But this season has been ugly. Let's hope we can at least get to 84 wins and go into the playoffs feeling not completely horrible about ourselves by winning this final game of the regular season with whoever we end up deciding to pitch. And we have gone to our AAA team, the left-hander Hideyasu Oki. Been sitting around since the end of Albany's season. He was 16-9 with a 4.61 ERA, 30-year-old who was a minor league free agent signing almost 5 years ago. Had a little bit of action with Buffalo last year, was not up at all this year. But we are going to start him today. We have got both Hayden Yinger and Sean Sullivan benched to ensure that potentially those two guys can be our starters for the first two games, depending on when the playoff series begins. So we'll see if we can at least get to 84 victories with a win today. But clearly the season has not gone as anticipated or hoped. And we close out the season with another loss. So we finish at 83-79. Do end up getting that third wild card, so we will be playing at San Francisco. But clearly, the season did not end the way that we had hoped. Very little about this season went according to plan. Our worst month of the season in September with a 10-15 record. So we started the season with a losing record in April, had our worst month of the season in September. Between then, we were a little bit above average, but never exceptional. Ended up middle of the pack, 7th in the National League in runs scored. Ended up improving to 6th in runs allowed as our bullpen ERA did get better over the last month or two of the season, while our starters ERA was going in the other direction. So it's been a rough year, but we are in the playoffs for a third consecutive season. Never know what can happen if we've got our chance in the tournament, but certainly would think with the injuries, most notably to our starting shortstop Marcelo Meyer, our starting left fielder Vance Honeycutt, and the fact that our ace pitcher is suspended, could be a very quick trip to the playoffs for these Buffalo Wings. But we'll find out about that in our next episode. Before we finish up, just take a look at the leaderboard. Samuel Basallo ended up finishing second in the National League with 41 homers. You can see his production over the 3 years of his career has been pretty darn consistent. He's won a Silver Slugger at DH each of his first two seasons with a .252 average, and as I mentioned, second in the league with 41 homers. Would think he'll certainly be in the mix for a Silver Slugger at DH again this year. Deshaun Seifu did end up leading the league in stolen bases, even though it was a significantly lower figure than he had put up each of the previous seasons. His batting average dipped to .263, though. 47 doubles, 9 triples, scored 93 runs, but he was a below average offensive player by some of the metrics. His BABIP dipped to .314 this year, his OPS barely above 700, and only a 3.3 WAR after an 8.5 WAR a year ago. So a down season for Seifu for the first time in Deshaun's major league career. He doesn't lead the league in triples, although, as I mentioned, he did lead the league in steals for a third consecutive season this year. I'm guessing we're not going to have any pitchers on the leaderboard with the way things have gone, and we do not. So an 83-79 season is definitely not what we envisioned for the Buffalo Wings. A 3-7 record over our last 10 with 3 straight losses is certainly not what we envisioned as we were preparing for the postseason. But it is what it is at this point. We will find out what our Buffalo Wings can do in the playoffs with our depleted roster against the San Francisco Giants in our next episode. And until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.